this is the problem of the millennium. And in the last, 50 years, we have gone from a society that basically cooked at home, prepared its own food, to now a society that doesn't even know how to cook. We've lost an important, and I would say seminal and integral component of our lifestyle in the process of basically two-parent working families, shuttling kids back and forth to and from this activity, that activity, and of course the money that has gone out the window in terms of processed food and in terms of healthcare. So I want to today take a step backward and do for you what Chris and I do on a daily basis. How many of you in the room today are scientists? How many of you use the scientific method in your daily lives or in your research? A couple of you, okay? Well, for those of you who don't, I have to describe for you what it is that we do in order for you to understand how we come to such a conclusion as what's on this title slide, an experiment that failed. So you have to understand what an experiment is, and you have to know what success or failure is. So let me take you through that. So here's a slide of sort of what I do on a daily basis. You pose a hypothesis based on the data that's currently available, and you say, this must be true, and I'm going to test it by setting up a procedure that will evaluate that hypothesis and exclude all confounders. So you design the experiment, and you determine what the outcome should be a priori, and you then either support or you refute that hypothesis. Right? You assess the baseline parameters before you walk into the experiment, so you know where you're starting, so you know what the change will be over the course of the experiment. You carry out the experiment and you gather the data as you go, and you figure out what's going on during the course of the experiment so that you can ultimately work backwards to figure out what happened if you need to. You assess the outcome parameters as you reach the end of whatever the interval that you were studying was. And if the outcome is as expected, you publish it, you get grant money, you move on to the next experiment and the next hypothesis. That's great. And if the outcome is not as expected, which is about 10 times more likely than the experiment actually working, your job is to figure out what happened. What went wrong? Was it because the procedure itself was flawed and you couldn't actually get the data out of it that you thought, because it's garbage in, garbage out? Or was it because the hypothesis was flawed and you need to move on to another hypothesis? So you have to ask the question, do I want to repeat the experiment and do it differently, or do I want to do a completely different experiment? And that's the situation that all scientists face when an experiment fails, which is virtually all the time. Everybody got it? That's what I have to do. That's what Chris has to do. That's what the people who raise their hands have to do. Okay? And I'll tell you, it's a hell of a way to make a living. But that's what we do. All right? So let's imagine that the food industry 50 years ago posed a hypothesis. And that hypothesis is illustrated on this slide right here, that processed food is better than real food. That's what they said 50 years ago. And they said it for a whole bunch of different reasons, and we understand what those reasons are. And we've adopted a lot of those reasons, and we've sort of inculcated those into our daily lives. Now, what are the outcomes that you have to look at to determine whether or not this hypothesis is correct? Well, you have to look at consumption. Did consumption go up? Yes or no? Did health improve? Yes or no? Did the environment get better or worse? And finally, cash flow. Did companies make money? Did consumers save money? And did society do well or not? These are the questions that ultimately will determine the success or failure of this experiment. Everybody got it? So that's what we're going to analyze today. because the food industry refuses to. So we're going to do it for them. Got it? Okay. So here's the experiment. 1965. Everybody remember these? Okay, Swanson TV dinners, the first ultra-processed marketed fast food, processed food, and it was in everybody's home. And they told us that this was going to liberate women from the kitchen. Now, has it? Yeah, it sort of has. And that's one of the reasons why we have two-parent working families now and nobody to shuttle your kids and all the daycare and everything else. In fact, it did liberate women from the kitchen, because if we didn't have those, they probably still would be in the kitchen. Whether that's a good thing or not is up to your own decision-making. And Spam, everybody remember Spam, right? Okay. So that was 50 years ago. Okay? This is what we have now. And everybody recognizes all of these. Okay? So the processed food industry has certainly advanced and evolved over the past 50 years to provide us with all of this fare, which we are now consuming. But what's interesting is, with all of the different processed food that's out there for us to be able to choose from today, how many companies do you think make those? No, it turns out there are 10. And here they are. Okay? Kraft, Coke, Pepsi, Kellogg's, Mars, Unilever, J&J, P&G, and Nestle. Okay? They control 90% of the food distribution and marketing in this country. These 10 conglomerates. And to be honest with you, they all do the exact same things. So that's very interesting. So basically, our food has been uniformly changed over the past 50 years. A very good experiment in terms of before and after. So let's talk about that. Okay? So here's what processed food is. Number one, it has to be mass-produced, okay, on a big scale. You know, we're not talking about individual chefs here. We're talking about, you know, conglomerates. Anybody ever been to a food processing plant? You have, huh? What was it like? It's a plant. Are there any windows? There are no windows. Why is that? Why are there no windows in a food processing plant? Because they don't want you to see what's going on in there. Because if you did, you wouldn't eat it. Okay, truly. You can't believe what's going on there. There is not one piece of machinery that is recognizable that would be in a normal kitchen. Nothing. Nada. It's fascinating. Really very interesting. It has to be consistent batch to batch, because not just batch to batch, but in fact location to location, because they're making it in different places at different times. Okay? Has to be consistent country to country, for obvious reasons, like McDonald's, right? You know, because after all, you know, it's McDonald's. It carries the brand. It's got to, you know, convey a certain taste. Specialized ingredients from specialized companies. We're not talking about, you know, just food here. We're talking about all sorts of additives, and we're talking about all sorts of other things that you add to the food in order to make those things consistent from country to country. Virtual every macronutrient is pre-frozen. The only thing that's not pre-frozen are the spices. Everything comes from a freezer. Fascinating, really. Okay? And that means that the fiber had to be removed, because what happens when you freeze fiber? You get mush. Go home, take an orange, put it in your freezer overnight, take it out the next day, put it on the counter, thaw it, try to eat it, see what you get. What do you get? You get mush, because the ice crystals macerate the cell wall of the plant with the orange, okay, and allow the water to rush in and turns it into mush. But of course, food industry knows that. So what do? They squeeze it and freeze it, lasts forever. Goes from being a food to being a commodity. That's the definition of a commodity, storable food. And you can buy and sell commodities on a commodities exchange. You can't buy and sell food on a food exchange, but you can with commodities. So this works for people trying to make money. Okay? it has to stay emulsified. What does that mean? Anybody know what emulsifiers are? So these are chemicals, they're detergents, really, that help bring fat and water together. All right? That's why you add detergents to the washing machine, is so that you can get the soaps to the stain. Otherwise, you couldn't do that. So what happens if those emulsifiers are working inside your intestine? What do you think happens? It actually strips off the mucus layer of the epithelial cells inside your intestine. And there are actually studies now, in animals at least, we don't have it, human studies, that say that you can actually show closer apposition of the food to the cells because the mucus layer has been damaged and has actually been lost in some cases. And that may be part of the problem of food allergy and irritable bowel syndrome and several of the other food-related diseases that we know about today, although that's not known for sure yet. But there was a paper in Nature just 3 weeks ago that posed that, at least in animals. Okay? And again, it has to have very long shelf life or freezer life. Everybody knows the 10-year-old Twinkie, right? Right? It's got to last forever. Right? And that's, again, for depreciation. Okay. So let's list what processed food is, how it's different from real food. Everybody got it? So, not enough what? Not enough fiber, because you have to take the fiber out in order to freeze it. Not enough omega-3 fatty acids, which you find in wild fish, not farmed fish, because the fish don't make the omega-3s. What makes the omega-3s? The algae make the omega-3s. The fish eat the algae, we eat the fish. So if you're consuming farmed fish, which is processed food, you might as well be eating a steak. All right, everybody got that? Very important you understand that. So you have to know where your fish comes from. Well, of course, how do you find out? Sometimes not so easy. Okay. Micronutrients, okay? Not enough micronutrients because the micronutrients travel with the fiber fraction. So when you remove the fiber, you remove a lot of the micronutrients. So most of the processed food is deficient in micronutrients that we need in order to be able to metabolize food properly. And then there's a whole bunch of things that are too much. Too much trans fats. Now, we know that trans fats are bad. This stuff is consumable poison. So much so that the Food and Drug Administration finally, after 25 years, finally on November 7th, 2013, agreed that trans fats were not generally recognized as safe. And so they will be disappearing from our food supply. Hooray. Took 25 years. Okay. What else? Branched chain amino acids, leucine, isoleucine, valine. These are 3 amino acids that you have to eat, you can't make, and levels of these in your blood correlate with metabolic syndrome, all the cardiovascular, diabetes diseases, the non-communicable diseases, all the chronic diseases that we know are all on the rise. And levels of these amino acids correlate with those in humans, and they are higher in corn-fed anything, which of course is processed food. Corn-fed beef, corn-fed chicken, corn-fed fish, which is farm fish. Okay? Omega-6 fatty acids. So what are omega-6s? Those are pro-inflammatory. Now you need omega-6s, you need omega-3s, you need both, but you need them in the right ratio, and omega-6s is what you find in seed oils, like corn oil, soybean oil. And these are pro-inflammatory. Now you need inflammation because you need to be able to knock out bacteria, you need to be able to mount an immune response when you're sick and have a virus, etc. But you don't need it all the time. So we're supposed to have an omega-6 to omega-3 ratio of about 1 to 1, we're told. We right now have an omega-6 to omega-3 ratio of about 25 or 30 to 1. So the question is that pro-inflammatory or not? All these different additives, and I don't want to get into all the different additives because we could go off for 10 hours on all the different additives, and that would just, there's not enough videotape in the camera for that. Emulsifiers, like I mentioned, okay, the ones that you may have heard of are called polysorbate 80 and carboxymethylcellulose. Those are the emulsifiers that are typically used. Too much salt, right? Everybody knows about salt. So salt's very complicated. There are some people who are exquisitely salt sensitive, and they need a reduction in their salt content. And there are some people who aren't as salt sensitive, and it's not as important. Now, as a doctor, I care about everybody, and we are triple over our salt limit. So I'm for reducing salt, but when you look at the data, it's complicated as to who benefits and who doesn't. But nonetheless, it's still a good thing to reduce salt. And then the big one, the big kahuna, the in-your-face, the you can't touch this, sugar. Okay? And that's what we're going to talk mostly about today, because the food industry uses sugar like you use salt. Okay? They hype up virtually every food to make it more palatable, and they do it with sugar. Why? Because there are 5 taste buds on your tongue. Okay? There's sweet, of course. There's salty. There's sour. There's umami. Everybody knows what that is? That's like roast beef or soy sauce. And then there's bitter. So here are examples of each of those. So sugar hides salty. That's like Chex Mix or honey roasted peanuts. It hides sour, like the German wines. You know, I mean, nobody would drink that stuff except that they add a little bit of Swiss Reserve back, because there's so much citric acid in the German wines because they don't get any sun, okay, that you have to cut the acidity, and you do it with sugar. It's the same reason why you add a little sugar to your salad dressing when you make balsamic vinegar and oil, because it cuts the sourness or a little bit. How about, and lemonade, of course. It cuts umami, like sweet and sour pork. You know, that's half soy sauce. You wouldn't touch that, except you add a little sugar. You can't even tell that there was any soy sauce in there. And then finally, it cuts bitter, like milk chocolate, right? Okay. So, why? Here's why. Because there are no foodstuffs in nature that are both sweet and acutely poisonous. None. It was the signal to our ancestors that any given food that they found in nature was safe to eat and wouldn't make them keel over and die. Liking sweet is ingrained into our DNA. We love this stuff. We will go out of our way for this stuff. It is completely vestigial from a metabolic standpoint. It gives us no benefit in terms of anything but as an energy source. There is no biochemical reaction in the body that requires dietary sugar. Yet, we love it anyway. And a perfect example of this is ackee fruit. Everybody know Jamaican ackee fruit? So anybody ever seen this stuff? It's over here on the right. So, if you live in Jamaica, you know don't eat the ackee fruit until it's either bloomed, like here, or it's fallen from the tree. Because if you eat the ackee fruit when it's immature, there is a compound in it called hypoglycin. And this hypoglycin can actually lower your blood sugar to about 5 and causes something called Jamaican vomiting sickness, and you can die from it, and I've actually seen a case of that. Okay? But if you wait till it blooms, the hypoglycin is metabolized, and now it's safe to eat. And of course, it's the Jamaican national dish, and they can it and send it all over the country, all over the world. Okay? And it's basically, you know, what they eat. Okay. So the question is this stuff addictive? Well, we know that there are certain things that are addictive and hazardous to our health. The question is, what about this stuff? Is this stuff addictive and hazardous to our health? Depends on who you ask. If you ask the chief medical officer of Amsterdam, Paul van der Welpen, he will tell you that sugar is both addictive and the most dangerous drug of our times. Okay, this is coming from Amsterdam. Really? And they would know something about that. Okay? I mean, you know, think about that. Really. Well, in fact, we actually know this too. Why do we know this? Because of this stuff. Anybody recognize this? Anybody work in a neonatal intensive care unit or in a newborn nursery? Anybody know what this stuff over here is? It's called Sweeties. Sweeties. What is it? It is a super concentrated sucrose sugar solution that you dip the pacifier in and then stick in the newborn boy's mouth before you do the circumcision. Oh! The Jews use wine. Everybody else uses Sweeties. So we know, okay? It releases endogenous opioids, okay? Because that's our endogenous painkiller. It's an opiate, okay? And it does the same thing as opiates do. So here's the key. Of the 600,000 food items that you can find in the American grocery store today, 74% of them have added sugar. And of the 4,000 packaged items in the American food supply that were looked at recently in this article that just came out like a week ago, only 50% had greater than the recommendation for added salt. So what does that mean? That means that sugar is actually the marker for processed food even more than salt is, because sugar's in more things than salt is. So that's the question for today. Is sugar public enemy number one? Because it is not just the marker for processed food, but it is the thing that distinguishes processed food. And the question is it okay in the doses that we are currently exposed to in processed food by the food industry, because it hides all the other negative aspects of food and gets you to buy more? That's the question for today, and that's the experiment. If you add sugar to your diet, what happens to you? And that's the last 50 years. Okay? So let's look at the outcomes. So remember we said consumption, health, environment, cash flow. Those are our 4 outcome variables. So let's look at the first one, consumption. So you could say, well, we definitely have a consumption problem. Because over there on the left, we have the original White Castle hamburger, right? Before processed food, 210 calories. And then over there in the middle, we have Bob's Big Boy at 618 calories. And in the midst of the obesity epidemic, Hardee's had the temerity to offer us the Thick Burger at 1,420 calories. And of course, you can go today to Carl's Jr. just down the street on El Camino Real and get the $6 burger at 2,000 calories. And so you say, QED, there you go. That's what it's all about. Consumption's up. Oh, consumption's way up, no question. In fact, total calories are up over the last 25 years. In men, 187 calories per day more than 25 years ago. In women, 335 calories a day more than 25 years ago. In teen boys, in this slide, 275 calories more than 25 years ago. Yes, we are all eating more. Consumption is definitely up since the advent of processed food. Slam dunk. But what are we eating more of? Is it fat? Not really, no. In fact, fat's about the same. 5 grams, 45 calories. So here's the secular trends in specific food intake. And if you take a look at what's circled in purple, that's all the fats. So whole milk, way down. Right? We were told really bad for you because it had saturated fat. Well, it turns out, you know what? A saturated fat isn't necessarily saturated fat. Turns out that dairy saturated fats have a very different metabolic signature than do red meat saturated fats. And they may actually be protective for diabetes and possibly even protective for heart disease based on epidemiologic studies. But we lumped them all together. Okay? So whole milk, way down. Meat and cheese up very slightly. Milk, desserts. Bottom line, it's a wash. That's what the data say. And in fact, we are eating exactly the same amount of fat as we did before. But because calories have gone up, because consumption's gone up, the percent of calories as fat has gone down because we've gone from 40 to 30% because we were told to. We were told by the USDA, the original dietary guidelines of 1977 told us to reduce our consumption of total fat and saturated fat from 40 to 30%. And guess what? We've done it. And look what has happened. Wow, you want an experiment? You want an outcome that you can measure? Oh, we got it. We got it big. Okay? So what are we eating more of if it's not fat? Well, it's carbohydrate. 228 calories. We're eating lots more carbohydrate. Okay? And here's that same slide I showed you before, but now the carbohydrate is circled as well. And you can see all of them through the roof. That's what's gone up. Carbohydrate. And in particular, what carbohydrate? Well, 41% increase in soft drinks, 35% increase in fruit drinks, fruit aids, etc. Okay? Just remember, 1 can of soda a day is 150 calories times 365 days a year, divided by the magic number 3,500 calories in a pound, which I don't even believe, but that's what the dietitian will tell you. Okay? And so that's worth 15.5 pounds a year. It's actually worth more. It's worth more. Because things that make your insulin go up higher make you gain more weight even on the same number of calories. And my friend Dr. Gardner will explain that when he talks with you later. Okay? So what is this stuff? Well, in America it's this stuff here, right? High fructose corn syrup. Why high fructose corn syrup? Well, number one, it's from corn, right? Anybody know the dirtiest 4-letter word in the English language? No, it's not corn. There's a dirtier 4-letter word in the English language. Iowa. Because Iowa is the first presidential caucus. And you can't win the presidency if you don't win Iowa. Ask John McCain. Okay? No one wants to touch this. This is the third rail of American politics. No one wants to touch this. And of course, corn is the second dirtiest word for the same reason. Okay. So our current annual consumption is 63 pounds per person, but interestingly, only the US, Canada, Japan, and very limited exposure in parts of Europe use this stuff. Yet, the entire rest of the world has the exact same problem we do. In fact, diabetes rates are higher in China and in India than they are here, and they don't have high fructose corn syrup. It's actually as high in Australia as it is here, and they don't have high fructose corn syrup. What do they have? They just have table sugar. They have sucrose. So here's the difference. So high fructose corn syrup is on the top. So it's either 42 or 55% fructose, that 5-membered ring on the right. That's the sweet molecule. That's the one we seek. That's the one that's addictive. Glucose, over there on the left, that 6-membered ring, that's the energy of life. Every cell on the planet burns glucose for energy. Glucose is so goddamn important that if you don't consume it, your body makes it. So, is glucose a nutrient? Sure. Is glucose an essential nutrient? No. Because you don't need it, because your body will make it. Unless you have glycogen storage disease, in which case then you have to come to me as a pediatric endocrinologist. But short of that, everybody else makes it. But this stuff over here, this 5-membered ring, fructose, no biochemical reaction in a vertebrate that requires dietary fructose. It's completely vestigial. It is an energy source. That's true. But it provides no nutrition because there's no biochemical reaction that requires it. Can anybody name an energy source that has absolutely no function in the body, that we like a lot, but that is toxic in high dose? Alcohol, thank you. Alcohol. Alcohol is an energy source, but alcohol is not nutrition. Yet we love it, yet it's toxic, and we regulate it. Sugar's the same thing, because fructose is metabolized exactly like alcohol. In fact, sugar is the alcohol of the child. And that's why children today are getting the diseases of alcohol, type 2 diabetes and fatty liver disease, without drinking alcohol. Because they've just substituted one addictive substance for another. Everybody got it? And that's, of course, why the food industry puts it in. Okay. So that explains this right here. So I call this slide very specifically the Coca-Cola conspiracy, and you'll see why in a moment. Okay? They haven't sued me yet. So over there on the left, 1915, the original 6.5-ounce bottle of Coca-Cola, standardized out of Atlanta. If you drank one of those every day for a year, that'd be worth 8 pounds of fat per year. Then, after World War II, when sugar became plentiful again after rationing, Okay? We had the 10-ounce bottle, first one found in vending machines over there. That would be worth 13 pounds of fat per year. Okay? Then, of course, in 1960, we got the ever ubiquitous 12-ounce can, okay, which is worth 16 pounds of fat per year. And, of course, today, that is the single unit of measure over there, the 20-ounce bottle. It's the only one you can now find anywhere. And that's, if you drank one of those every day, that would be worth 26 pounds of fat per year. But how many servings are in that bottle? Anybody know? 2.5. 2.5 8-ounce servings in that bottle. Anybody know anybody who gets 2.5 8-ounce servings out of that? That's a single serving. Okay? And then finally, in the middle, we have the 7-Eleven Big K Thirst Buster Big Gulp. 44 ounces, worth 57 pounds per year. And my colleague, Dr. Dan Hale, tells me that down at the University of Texas, San Antonio, they got a Texas-sized Big Gulp. 60 ounces of Coca-Cola, Snickers bar, and a bag of Doritos, all for 99 cents. That is what processed food has brought us. That would be worth 112 pounds of fat per year. And by the way, in case you didn't know, on April 11th, that is this Saturday, 2 days from today, 7-Eleven is offering a promotion. Bring any vessel from your home that is not an inflatable pool and fill it up with Slurpee for $1.49. You think I'm kidding. I ain't kidding. Okay? That they will not take inflatable pools. Okay. So, and before I get there. So why do I call it the Coca-Cola conspiracy? Well, what's in Coke? Let's start with something else. What? Caffeine, caffeine. Thank you, caffeine. So what's caffeine? It's a mild stimulant, and it's also a diuretic. Works on the kidney to make you urinate free water. What else is in Coke? Salt, 55 milligrams per can. So what happens if you take on salt and lose free water? You get thirstier, right? So why is there so much sugar in Coke? To hide the salt. I showed you that already. Now, do you have to make soda with salt? Anybody ever heard of Royal Crown Cola? It's long gone, okay? But you probably grew up with it, okay? Tastes bad? No, it was perfectly fine. 0 sodium. You don't have to put salt in Coke, but they do, because they know, because they get you to drink more. So, Coca-Cola conspiracy. They know what they're doing, and you don't. So here is the last 200 years of sugar consumption in the United States. Starting in 1820, when we got fruits and vegetables out of the ground with the occasional honey, it was worth about 4 pounds of sugar per year. And over here, we topped out at about 100 pounds of sugar per year. And you can see the different phases of sugar consumption and production in the United States. We had the growth of the sugar industry in the late 1800s, early 1900s, you know, in Louisiana, in the Bayou, and in Hawaii. Okay? And then we had stabilization where, you know, production, correlated with price, you know, so you reached equilibrium. Then you had rationing during World War II, as you can see there. And then it came back up to the same level. And then we had processed food. And then on top of that, we got high fructose corn syrup, which was half the price. And so what happened? Whew. Oh, and plus we went low fat, all at the same time. Everything happened at once. And so we went sailing over. So where is the sugar in our food right now? So half of it's in soft drinks, as you can see. And by the way, on April 22nd, our state legislators will be debating a soda label warning ban on the can or on the bottle. Okay, and I was actually in Sacramento lobbying for this for the California Center for Public Health Advocacy just 3 weeks ago. Okay, and I will tell you, I followed the chief scientist for Pepsi-Cola, who was there as well, Danielle Greenberg. Fascinating. Okay, so you know what's going on. There's a lot of stuff going on. So, yeah, half of it's in soft drinks, but that means that half of it's not. Half of it's in stuff you didn't know had it, like salad dressing, barbecue sauce, tomato sauce, breakfast cereal, hamburger buns, hamburger meat, for that matter, yogurt. And who here thinks that yogurt is healthy? Plain yogurt is healthy. Okay? The Europeans eat plain yogurt and then throw whole fruit in to cut the sourness. Because, like, what is yogurt? It's sour milk, right? What's the difference between yogurt and the milk that sours in your refrigerator? So for yogurt, you get to choose the bacteria that does the souring. That's it. That's the big difference. All right? But in America, yogurt is not sour milk. Yogurt is dessert. That's what's happened. That's what processed food brought us. Yogurt for dessert. Okay. So now we've agreed that consumption's up. Let's do health. So what's happened to health? I know what's happened to health care, okay, because I'm a doctor, and let me tell you, it sucks. But what's happened to health? So let's look. This is from the New England Journal. Let's look at what's happened. So smoking down, blood pressure down, cholesterol down, physical activity up. We should be reaping a health benefit from all of those things happening, right? Shouldn't we? Well, we're not. How come? Because obesity's up and diabetes is way up. Off the charts in every developed and developing country, right? India, 11% diabetes. China, 11% diabetes. We're only at 9.3% diabetes, but another 40% of us are pre-diabetic. So just diabetes waiting to happen. And that is cutting our lives short. And that is reducing money going into the system. And it's increasing the money going out of the system, which we'll talk about when we get to cash flow. So here's the problem right here. It's on this slide. Everybody remember Coca-Cola's Coming Together campaign from 2 years ago? It was on all the football games. This was their response to the obesity epidemic. And this is a direct quote from their campaign commercial. Beating obesity will take action by all of us based on one simple common sense fact. All calories count, no matter where they come from, including Coca-Cola and everything else with calories. In other words, you can get your calories from carrots, or you can get your calories from cheesecake, or you can get your calories from Coca-Cola, or you can get your calories from kumquats. Doesn't matter. If you eat more than you burn, you'll gain weight. If you eat less than you burn, you will lose weight. Therefore, a calorie is a calorie. It's about calorie balance. It's about you eat too much, you exercise too little. It's about diet and exercise. It's about if you're fat, it's your fault. It's about any calorie can be part of a balanced diet. And it's about why pick on our calories, go pick on somebody else's calories. Now, every one of those mantras has been ingrained across your forehead over the last 50 years. A calorie is a calorie. And it's common sense. They say so. You know what? I don't believe in common sense. I believe in science. I believe in data. And what the data say are completely different. What the data say are that some calories cause disease more than others because different calories are metabolized differently in the body. It's called nutritional biochemistry. And you want to know the kicker of all this? I learned this in college. I majored in nutritional biochemistry at MIT. In 1975, I knew this. And then I went to medical school. And they beat it out of me. And I forgot all this. Because that wasn't what we learned in medical school. We learned a calorie was a calorie. We learned obesity was the problem. We learned that if you eat too much and you exercise too little, you gain weight. And we learned that that fat that you gained caused all of the metabolic disturbances that we now see. And then I started doing my own research in 1995. And you know what? By 2005, I was absolutely convinced a calorie was not a calorie. And I came to the realization, wait a second. I started having night sweats. I started waking up in the middle of the night with like post-traumatic stress disorder. Because like, I knew this. And I had lost it. And I got it back. Maybe that's why I'm so passionate about it now, is because medical education does not discuss this, because they don't get it. They don't understand it. And this is sort of one of the seminal ends of the stool, that you can basically, hold on to. And if you kick that out from under, what happens to, your understanding of physiology, of science, of nutrition, of biochemistry, and of health? Basically, we're kicking it out from under. And people don't want it kicked out. And so there's this big fight, this big tension. And that's why we're having this discussion now. But a calorie is not a calorie. Now, how do I know that? Because we have the data. So here is a study from Europe called the EPIC Interact study. And what they did was they asked, do sugared sweetened beverages cause diabetes? So if you look at the red box at the bottom, what they did was it's called the adjusted model. They looked at every sugared beverage per day, adjusted for its calories and adjusted for its effects on obesity by BMI. And they showed that every sugar beverage increases your risk for diabetes by 29%. And we're not consuming one sugar beverage, we're consuming 2.5 on average. So take that up to 68%. Okay. We did this study, which didn't look at consumption, we looked at availability within countries. What we did was we took the Food and Agriculture Organization statistics database, which listed line item, country by country for the entire decade, 2000 to 2010. Total calories, fruits excluding wine, meats, cereals, fiber-containing foods, oils, sugar crops, and sweeteners. Line by line, item by item, for the whole decade, country by country. We then regressed that with the International Diabetes Federation statistics database for diabetes prevalence, country by country for the same period. And then we regressed that with the World Bank Gross National Income Database, which controls for poverty, urbanization, aging, physical activity, and obesity, all the confounders. Remember, you have to adjust for the confounders when you do science, right? And we asked the question, what about the world's diet predicts diabetes change country by country over the decade? And the answer, only sugar. Nothing else. Nothing else even came close. For every 150 calories extra any country ate, diabetes prevalence went up a total of 0.1%. Nada. But if those 150 calories happened to be a can of soda instead, diabetes prevalence went up 11-fold, 1.1%. And again, we're not drinking one soda a day, we're drinking 2.5. This study actually meets the criteria which were set up by Austin Bradford Hill back in the 60s to implicate tobacco and lung cancer. That is dose, more sugar, more diabetes. Duration, longer sugar exposure, more diabetes. Directionality, countries where sugar went up, more diabetes. Countries where sugar went down, and there were a few, less diabetes. And most importantly, for causation, you have to show precedence. 3 years. Whenever sugar changed, diabetes changed in the same direction 3 years later. That's causation. Same level of proof we have today for tobacco and lung cancer. Okay? Okay. Why? Here's why. Because sugar drives fat accumulation in the liver. That's why. Because when you put fat in your liver, then your pancreas has to make more insulin, and that burns out the pancreas and causes diabetes. And you can see from this study from my colleague Jean-Marc Schwartz, that was just in JCNM like 3 weeks ago. You can see that you can do the control period and then the sugar, or you can do the sugar period, then the control. Bottom line, it doesn't matter. The amount of liver fat went up 38% for the same number of calories over a 2-week period. And that drives insulin resistance, and that drives increased pancreatic insulin release, which then drives chronic metabolic disease. And we just had an abstract at the Endocrine Society just a month ago, and you can read it here. Restricting fructose in obese Latino and African American children reduces fat accumulation in the liver, 30% reduction on the same number of calories in 10 days, which also improved their insulin resistance and every other aspect of their metabolic health without changing weight. It didn't change their subcutaneous or big butt fat. It changed their visceral fat, and it absolutely lowered their liver fat. Same number of calories, because a calorie is not a calorie. And this is for heart disease death. This was published last year by Yang et al. From Harvard School of Public Health and the CDC. So what you're looking at here is a histogram of percent of calories consumed as added sugar over a 2-decade period. And the median of this histogram is 18%. Can you believe that? Half the country consumed more than 18% of their calories as added sugar. That's insane. It's supposed to be 4%. It was at 18%. Okay? Now that red line in the center is the hazard risk ratio for heart disease death. And the inflection point is at 15%. Median's 18%, inflection point 15%. So what does that mean? It means that more than half of the United States has an increased risk of heart disease death due to their added sugar consumption. Controlling for obesity, controlling for calories, just because of the added sugar. Because it's not about the calories, and it's not about the obesity. Alcohol is not dangerous because it's calories. Alcohol is not dangerous because it causes obesity. Alcohol is dangerous because it's alcohol. Sugar is the same thing. It's dangerous because it's sugar, because of its unique stereochemistry and because of what it does and because of how the liver metabolizes it, because it's not necessary, because it's not really a nutrient. It's an energy source, it's not a nutrient. In fact, we have causation for these 4 diseases, and these 4 diseases will be on that warning label if the California State Legislature passes the motion. Diabetes, heart disease, fatty liver disease, and tooth decay. We have causation for every single one of those. The ones we only have correlation for today, so we don't discuss them yet, is cancer and dementia. But I'm really interested in both of those. And I just met with Stan Prusner, the Nobel Prize winner up at UCSF, about whether or not sugar could cause dementia and how we might be able to actually look at that question going forward in the next couple of years.